I didn't lose the $42,000 all at once. It disappeared the way trust does, quietly, patiently, right under my nose, until one morning I opened my banking app and felt my chest cave in. The number on the screen didn't make sense. I refreshed it, then again. I whispered the balance out loud as if hearing it might fix it. It didn't. My savings, money I had built dollar by dollar over 27 years of overtime shifts, skipped vacations, and second-hand furniture, was gone. Not all of it, but enough to leave a hollow ache behind my ribs, enough to make my hands shake. At first, I assumed the bank had made a mistake. Banks make mistakes, right? I called customer service, my voice calm in that practiced way you learn when life has trained you not to panic. The woman on the line read back the transactions slowly, professionally. Transfers, withdrawals, all authorized, all traced back to my own account credentials. That was when the truth started pressing against me, heavy and unwanted. Only one other person knew my passwords. Only one person had ever needed them. My son. I sat at the kitchen table long after the call ended, staring at the wood grain like it might rearrange itself into a different answer. Memories rose without permission. Him at 8 years old, counting coins from a jar so he could buy me a birthday card. Him at 16, swearing he'd take care of me someday because, "You've done everything for me, Mom." I had believed him. I had built my life around that belief. He'd gotten married 6 months earlier. A quick wedding. A woman I barely knew. New apartment. New furniture. New car. I remembered feeling uneasy, but I told myself it was just a mother struggling to let go. I never imagined I was also being emptied out. When I confronted him that evening, my voice was barely recognizable. Not angry, not accusing, just broken. I asked him if he knew anything about the missing money. He didn't even look surprised. He sighed like I was the one being unreasonable, like I'd interrupted his day with something trivial. Then he said it, casually, carelessly, as if confessing to borrowing sugar from a neighbor. "I needed it, she needed it, we're starting our life." Starting your life, I thought, by dismantling mine. He explained it like a plan he'd already justified to himself. He'd pay it back later, once things settled, once his business idea worked, once life got easier. There was no apology, no fear, just expectation, like my sacrifice was automatic, like my pain was the cost of his happiness. I told him that money was my security, my emergency fund, my future medical care, my safety. He waved his hand and said I was being dramatic. He reminded me that I lived alone, that I didn't need much anymore. Those words cut deeper than the theft itself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the refrigerator hum, counting the seconds between breaths. I replayed every moment I'd chosen him over myself, every time I'd said yes when I should have said no, every instinct I'd silenced because a mother is supposed to give, even when it hurts. The pain wasn't just financial. It was personal, intimate. It was the realization that the child I raised with love had learned entitlement instead, that my kindness had been mistaken for weakness. And worst of all, that the person who knew exactly where to hurt me had chosen to do it anyway. By morning, my eyes burned, my head throbbed, and something inside me had cracked, but it hadn't broken completely. Not yet. Thought the worst of it was already behind me. I was wrong. A week after I confronted my son, his wife invited me to a small family dinner. She said it was to clear the air. Those words sounded reasonable, almost kind, and against my better judgment, I agreed. I told myself it was a chance to heal, to speak quietly like adults, to salvage what little dignity remained between us. The restaurant was crowded, bright, and loud, exactly the wrong place for a fragile conversation. As soon as I arrived, I realized this was no small dinner. His in-laws were there, his cousins, even a few family friends I hadn't seen in years. Smiles greeted me, curious and sharp, like they already knew something I didn't. We hadn't even ordered food, when his wife leaned back in her chair and laughed. "So," she said loudly, tapping her manicured nails against her glass, "are we still pretending that money was ever really yours?" The table went quiet in that awful, heavy way silence falls when it's about to crush someone. I felt heat rush to my face. My son didn't stop her. He didn't even look uncomfortable. He stared at his plate, jaw tight, letting her speak for him. She continued, voice sweet but edged with venom. She told everyone how I was controlling, how I'd hoarded money instead of helping my own child, how I was trying to punish them for getting married. She framed the theft as generosity they were entitled to, and my objection as selfishness bordering on cruelty. People started nodding. Some looked at me with pity, others with judgment. I tried to speak, but my throat closed. Every word I'd practiced vanished. I felt small, exposed, like my private pain had been dragged under fluorescent lights for entertainment. Then my son finally spoke. "She's always been like this," he said, not looking at me. "She keeps score. She acts like everything she ever did for me was a favor." That was the moment something inside me went cold. Years of packed lunches, late-night fevers, school meetings, part-time jobs stacked on full-time hours, reduced to keeping score. My love rewritten as manipulation. My sacrifice reframed as a burden. Someone across the table chuckled awkwardly. Another person murmured, "Parents should help their kids. That's just how it is." I wanted to stand up. I wanted to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. I sat there while my reputation was dismantled piece by piece by the very people who had benefited most from my silence. The bill came. My son slid it toward me without even asking. That gesture, small, casual, hurt more than the words, as if it were assumed, as if I still owed them, as if humiliation wasn't enough. I paid. My hands shook as I signed the receipt. I stood, forced a polite smile, and said I had an early morning. No one stopped me. No one followed. Outside, the night air hit me hard. I walked to my car and sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, breathing through the ache in my chest. Tears came, hot and unstoppable, not loud sobs, but the kind that leak out when you've been emptied too many times. That was the night I understood something clearly for the first time. They weren't just taking my money. They were taking my voice. And they were counting on me to stay quiet. After that night, I stopped explaining myself. I didn't call my son. I didn't answer his wife's messages, which swung wildly between forced politeness and thinly veiled threats. I didn't defend myself to relatives who had already made up their minds. I learned quickly that silence unsettles people more than arguments ever do. When you stop reacting, they're forced to sit with their own behavior, and most people hate that. Outwardly, my life looked unchanged. I still woke before dawn, still brewed the same cheap coffee, still folded my clothes with careful precision. But inside, something had shifted. The pain was still there, yes, but it had settled into a sharp, focused awareness. I began reviewing everything. Bank statements, old emails, text messages, dates, amounts, patterns. I printed them all and spread them across my dining table like pieces of a puzzle. That was when I realized the theft hadn't been impulsive. It had been systematic, small transfers at first, then larger ones, always timed around moments when he knew I was busy or exhausted. He hadn't just taken my money. He had studied me. That knowledge hurt more than I expected. It meant this wasn't desperation. It was strategy. I opened a new account at a different bank, changed every password, froze my credit, quietly met with a financial advisor, then a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone, not even the one friend who still checked in on me. I needed clarity without noise, control without commentary. The lawyer was calm, almost gentle as she explained my options. Civil action, criminal charges, recovery possibilities, timelines. I listened without interrupting, my hands folded neatly in my lap. On the inside, my heart pounded, but my face stayed still. I wasn't ready to act yet, not until I understood everything. Meanwhile, the rumors spread. I heard them secondhand, that I was bitter, that I lost it, that I was jealous of my son's wife, that I was punishing them by cutting off contact. I let the stories grow unchecked. I let them believe I was weak, confused, overwhelmed. My son sent one message after 3 weeks of silence. "You're really going to act like a victim forever." I stared at the screen for a long time before locking the phone and placing it face down. That message confirmed what I needed to know. He felt no guilt, only irritation that I wasn't cooperating in my own exploitation. In the quiet that followed, something unexpected happened. I felt stronger. Silence gave me space. Space to think without being gaslit. Space to remember who I was before motherhood consumed my identity, before my worth became tied to what I could give away. I started walking every morning, long, slow laps around the neighborhood. I slept better, ate better. I even laughed once, alone, surprised by the sound of it. The world hadn't ended because I stopped chasing my son's approval. If anything, it felt lighter. I began drafting a timeline of events, not just for legal reasons, but for myself. Writing it down transformed chaos into clarity, pain into purpose. Every fact I documented was a small reclaiming of power. They thought my silence meant surrender. They were wrong. It was preparation. The first sign the balance had changed came quietly, like everything else I did now. I received a notification from the bank confirming the final transfer into my new, secured account. The remainder of my savings, what little he hadn't managed to take, was safe. I stared at the confirmation email longer than necessary, letting the reality sink in. For the first time in months, my money was mine again. That same afternoon, my lawyer filed the formal demand letter. It wasn't dramatic, no threats, no accusations written in anger, just facts, dates, amounts, authorization records, a clear total, $42,000, a deadline for repayment, and a simple statement at the end, failure to comply would result in further legal action. I didn't send it myself. I didn't call ahead. I didn't warn him. Silence, after all, works best when it's consistent. 2 days later, my phone rang. My son's name lit up the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. Minutes later, another call, then a message. "What is this? Why are lawyers involved?" I didn't respond. By evening, the tone changed. "This is unnecessary. We're family. You're embarrassing me." That word, embarrassing, almost made me smile. Not because I enjoyed his discomfort, but because I recognized it. He wasn't afraid of losing my trust. He was afraid of losing control. The next morning, his wife called. Her voice was sharper than before, stripped of sweetness. "You're going to destroy him over money," she snapped. "Do you know what people will think?" I listened, calm and detached, then said only one thing before ending the call. "I know exactly what happened." After that, I blocked the number. Word spread fast when power shifts. Relatives who hadn't checked on me in months suddenly wanted to understand my side. Family friends messaged with awkward apologies, claiming they'd been misled. I didn't engage. I didn't explain. I let the documents speak for me. My lawyer informed me that my son had contacted her office, frantic, insisting there must be some mistake. He claimed I had given him permission. We provided proof otherwise. Signed forms, login histories, IP addresses. Every attempt to deny it only tightened the net. For the first time, I saw him not as my child, but as a grown man facing consequences. And for the first time, I didn't rush to protect him. At night, I expected guilt to come for me, the old reflex to fix things, to smooth everything over, but it didn't arrive. What I felt instead was steady, grounded, as if my spine, bent for years, had finally straightened. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't pleading, I wasn't punishing. I was enforcing reality. The power shift wasn't loud or cruel. It was precise, calm, legal. It didn't rely on emotion or approval. It rested on truth. And once truth is formally acknowledged, it becomes very hard to ignore. They had built their life on the assumption that I would always absorb the damage. That assumption was about to cost them everything they thought was safe. The shock didn't come all at once. It rippled outward, touching everything my son thought was untouchable. The deadline in the demand letter passed without payment. Instead of relief, I felt an odd calm. I had already mourned the relationship I thought we had. What came next wasn't revenge fueled by anger. It was consequence fueled by clarity. My lawyer moved forward. Formal charges were filed. The bank was notified. The paper trail I'd so carefully assembled became official record. What had once been a family matter was now a legal one, and suddenly the rules changed. Stories don't work in court. Feelings don't outweigh facts. Entitlement doesn't cancel fraud. The first real crack came when my son's employer contacted him. Financial misconduct investigations have a way of spreading. Background checks don't care that you're someone's child. They care about patterns, risk, and credibility. I learned later that he'd taken time off work suddenly, claiming stress. The truth was, he was trying to get ahead of the damage. He came to my house unannounced one evening. I watched him through the window before opening the door. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but stripped of the confidence that once protected him. When I opened the door, he didn't step inside. He didn't ask how I was. He said, "You've made your point. This has gone far enough." That sentence told me everything. Not "I'm sorry," not "I was wrong," just enough. I told him to leave. He raised his voice then, panic leaking through irritation. He said I was ruining his marriage, his future, his reputation. He said his wife was pregnant, news delivered not with joy but as a shield. I listened without interrupting. Then I said quietly, "You should have thought of that before you took from me." He stared at me like he didn't recognize who I was anymore. Maybe he didn't. The version of me he'd relied on, the forgiving one, the silent one, was gone. The real shock came weeks later. The court froze several of his accounts pending investigation. His credit took a hit. A loan application for a new apartment was denied. His wife called again, this time crying, begging, offering partial repayment if I would just make it stop. I didn't gloat. I didn't argue. I said repayment would be handled through the court. When people talk about revenge, they imagine shouting, exposure, humiliation. What they don't talk about is how devastating calm accountability can be. How terrifying it is when the person you dismissed as harmless stops protecting you. I felt no joy watching him unravel. What I felt was distance, emotional separation, like stepping back from a painting and finally seeing it clearly. This wasn't about hurting him. It was about ending the cycle, where my pain paid for his comfort. The shock wasn't loud. It was the sound of a door closing that he'd always assumed would stay open. By the time the case reached its resolution, I had already made peace with whatever outcome awaited me. That surprised everyone, including myself. Months had passed, the noise had faded, the whispers stopped carrying my name. Life had settled into a quieter, steadier rhythm. I no longer woke up bracing for confrontation. I no longer checked my phone with dread. I had rebuilt something more valuable than the money. I had rebuilt my boundaries. The court didn't frame the decision in emotional language. It never does. It spoke in terms of responsibility, unlawful access, breach of trust. The judgment ordered structured repayment of the $42,000 with strict oversight. There were consequences tied to compliance, real ones. My son didn't look at me when it was read. I didn't look at him either. Justice, I learned, isn't about triumph. It's about alignment, when reality finally matches truth, when the story stops being twisted to protect the wrong person. Afterward, people asked me if I felt vindicated. I told them no. Vindication suggests anger still lives inside you. What I felt was release. I didn't celebrate. I didn't share details. I quietly redirected the recovered funds into long-term care planning and a small emergency reserve. Practical things, necessary things. For the first time, I planned my future without assuming someone else would respect it. My son tried to reach out once more, months later. His message was shorter than before, less defensive, still not an apology, but closer than he'd ever come. I hope one day you understand why I did what I did. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I deleted it. Understanding isn't required for justice. Accountability is. I wish I could say we reconciled. That time softened everything. That love conquered all. But real life isn't a fable, and moral justice isn't about happy endings. It's about honest ones. I still love my son. That never stopped. But love doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. It doesn't mean financing your own destruction. It doesn't mean absorbing harm to keep someone else comfortable. What I taught him in the end wasn't through sacrifice. It was through consequence. And what I taught myself was even more important. That kindness without boundaries is not virtue, it's vulnerability. That silence can be strategic. That power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it simply stands still and refuses to be moved. The $42,000 mattered. But what I truly reclaimed was my